Not the Footy Show.
I've decided to pursue a career in rugby league. It's basically all it is.
G'day everyone, welcome to episode 209 of Not the Footy Show. I'm Warrick Nicolson, and we are getting into rugby union to rugby league converts. And who better to get along for the ride than a rugby union convert himself, Mr. Robb Cox.
Way back when I played.
How
about
far
5
back do we have to go to the union days, mate?
For me, 1985, high school.
Same here.
A bit of rugby union and a little bit of rugby league.
I got penalised on the first tackle of the game when I was playing union, and then I got marched 10 metres for questioning the decision of the referee. So that was a good start.
Don't ever do that. That can end badly.
Man, I absolutely belted a bloke, picked him up and put him down. The ref didn't need to lift him up. And I've gone, what are you talking about? It was a great tackle. Tap, tap, tap. Down 3-0 very, very early. Yes. We are going into the best union to league converts this time around, Cocksmith. This episode's been brewing for a couple of weeks. We've done a bunch of best teams since 82. Has been the theme of the podcast series since we went on NRL hiatus. Coming up with a list here, we only went with top 5, and the reason for that is there's just not that many.
There's not that many because you're basically the sheriff at the moment, writing the rules and keeping everything, and it has to be between 1982 and today.
Sorry for.
And they couldn't be a league player.
Yeah, so
couldn't include a price.
I basically killed your list, didn't I?
Had to have played club rugby at least, or preferably something with a state or an Australian badge on it. Yeah, so you killed my list, mate.
So you basically had Takiri, Sailor, Rogers, SBW, Falau, etc. The reason I've added the criteria is essentially they had to have been somewhat established in union before they came to rugby league. So the base idea here is they've played club rugby standard, as in top level in their state. They've played state or provincial rugby in Australia or New Zealand. Or they've made international tours and or debuted or played test matches for their country. So it just gives you a bit of an establishment that they were union players. It wasn't a case of they were playing, a junior schoolboys for rugby league and junior schoolboys for rugby union at the same time. So a lot of current day players who did that have missed out on the criteria. And look, if you've got anybody out there, you've got a player that we think we've missed, we'd love to hear from you. Just get us on facebook.com/NRL podcast. And via the links you see on the screen on YouTube. Yep. The reason for this is it just narrows it down to a group of about 10 or 11 players that were legitimate union players who came across rugby league and made an impact. There is also a list, Cocksmith, of some very, very average unconverters, I think we're calling them, who came across for the money and disappeared very, very quickly back into rugby union. Any names that come to mind before we go to the first break that sort of fit that category?
Garrick Morgan.
Yes, the big hope for the South Queensland Crushers. He played all of 2 games. He will be featured on a list, no doubt. There was another player, actually, that the Crushers signed in 1995, Cocksmith. I'm going to ask you before we start. He was actually an established Australian Rugby Union international. Do you know who it was who signed for the Crushers in that same year?
No, mate.
Well,
no idea.
We'll get to that. Matty Duncan from our friend in Queensland. He remembers him strongly. He sent me through a thing on Twitter, and he said basically people considered him as a ready-made replacement for Mal Meninga. Such were the raps on this Wallaby who signed with the South Queensland Crushers. We will get to all of our picks for the best union to league converts on episode 209 of the Footy Show after the break.
Not the Footy Show.
11 minutes of the first half to go. Stewart, here's a call from Daly. Daly goes down the blind side. Daly looks for his winger. He finds the flying Fiji and Mandrugo. He's in for the Canberra try.
Okay, it's time to get stuck into it, Cocksmith. We've debated how we're going to get into this list. There are quite a number of good union to league converts, but coming up with a top 5 I found very difficult to narrow it to 5. And of course, I've ended up with 6. So I've stuck to my own criteria very, very well. I've got a 5A, a 5B, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a clear number 1. Did you have any troubles like I did of sticking to 5?
I like we just mentioned before in the previous segment, I had trouble narrowing it down because I wasn't completely au fait with the parameters, but when I became informed on those a little bit better, you like that word, au fait?
I like au fait.
Then I narrowed it down and got rid of all of my league players and went with dead set rugby union players, or at least firstly rugby union players. So. Look, I didn't go a 5A, but I'm more than happy to go with a 1 reserve, so a 5 and a reserve.
Yep.
So I've got my list, but I'm more interested in your list to begin with, mate, because you have a memory like a vault, and you hold on to stuff for a long time. I hope we never become enemies, because I'll probably never be able to sweet talk my way out of it, because you'll remember that time.
Well, don't we were talking about 2 days ago, people just on a general phone call, and naturally it got to rugby league at some stage, and Cocksmith's bringing out all these references to players. He's going, this guy who played for, and he hasn't had 3 words out of his mouth, and I've gone, he played for this team. Yeah, this guy. And I'm going, I'm sitting there, I'm just heading my hands going, why do I know this garbage? It's really depressing, really, really depressing. But useful if you're playing trivia, I guess.
Yeah.
We have to get rid of one player straight off the bat who I thought had played union before he came to rugby league. And we talked about him on the last podcast where he made our greatest Brisbane Broncos team. I thought Brad Thorne had played union in New Zealand. Incorrect.
Yeah, I did too.
Incorrect. He moved to Australia as a youngster, and league was his first real foray. And it wasn't until he went back to rugby union, I think it was 2003 or so, that he played for New Zealand, played Super Rugby, etc. And so he's off the list. And
he would have been in the 5.
Oh, he would have been well and truly up to the top of the 5. Such was his quality. So he's off the list, and you've already gone through the other players who were no good. I'm going to start at 5A and 5B, and they're 2 players, one who had a long career in the NRL and one who had a very short career in the NRL. My 5A, because of the impact and the quality in which I thought he played at, I cannot describe to you how disappointed, as much as he played for a team I hated, but seeing him go back to rugby union, and that was Craig Innes, the centre for Manly Warringah for a couple of years in 96 and 97. He played for the Western Reds. He played for the Leeds Rhinos after he converted, but he was an All Black who came to rugby league, and for those 2 years, 96, 97, he was just about the best centre in the game. I am a massive fan of Craig Innes.
Yeah, look, I do remember photographing him. I do remember watching him play football. Very, very good footballer. I think, just one of those guys that could probably do almost anything with the ball. Like he probably could play soccer as well, and he'd probably play AFL if he wanted to. Naturally gifted athlete. I do think rugby union was his best sport, but league wasn't far behind, mate. Yeah, great convert. Didn't see enough of him in Australia, unfortunately.
Well, I was watching something the other day on YouTube. I think it was like a 98 or a 99 season review. And there's a couple of really good ones on YouTube if you want to check them out. But Manly drop away massively in 98. Like they were on a high for those 3 years. And that team, and it's probably worth having a chat about one day, but Bob Fulton got that team to peak for 3 years. And they played at such a high intensity level, and the defence was amazing for those 3 seasons, 95, 96, 97. Innes left at the end of 97, went back to Union, and they didn't lose a heck of a lot of other players, and they went down to the toilet very, very quickly, Manly. And that defensive steel, and that's the thing I remember him as, it's just being an outstanding defensive centre. He was a really good attacking player, but he made John Hopewade look like he could tackle. I mean, that's the rap I'll give on Craig Innes. So he is number 5A. 5B is a guy who played a lot longer in the NRL, and he actually played, got the numbers here, he played 5 tests for the Wallabies. Scott Goulart is my 5B. He came across to St George in 1990, ended his career at Eastern Suburbs, or Sydney City as it was then, and we had him in our greatest St George, or I had him in my greatest St George Illawarra side.
I had him on the bench, yeah.
Just a really good footy player who probably could have been a little bit more potent, maybe in a better attacking team over the course of his career, but I really had to put him in my top 5 because he was a Wallaby who made it in rugby league, and there's not a lot of those really established Wallabies who came. Well, 5 tests is still enough, more than any of us probably listeners have played for Australia, but he came across as an established Wallaby and made a real impact in rugby league, and he's my 5B. When
you name someone as a 5B, is he basically the quasi 6, or is he the 5 and Innes is your second 5? I just want to know who's ranking higher.
Innes would be 5 because I think Innes had a real impact at Manly, and he was arguably the best centre at the time.
I'm not sure Scott. Not sure Scott's going to be all that happy, seeing as you named him at 6 and you called him impotent. But anyway,
impotent. When did I?
You said he wasn't all that potent.
Oh, gee.
Anyway, so I think Scotty Goulet was a fantastic player. Just terrorised people on the edge there. With he had a little turn of pace on him. He could accelerate, but his reach and his height and his ability to get the ball away one-handed was almost second to none because the defender couldn't get to him. He had arms that were 5 feet long, and being able to get that ball around was a cornerstone of his attack. Very tall, very big, and a very good player. So they're your 5s.
They're my 5A and 5B. Number 4 goes to a player who never played a massively high level of rugby union before he switched to the NRL, or the ARL as it was when he came across. He played schoolboy football schoolboy rugby union in Sydney, and then played 3 years at the Manly Marlins in the Sydney competition. And I'm talking about Ben Kennedy. He is my 4th ranked player in the Union to League converts. He came to Canberra at the very end of their period of dominance. In '96 was his first year. He played, I think it was 3 years with the Raiders, and he actually left the Raiders after getting busted for some off-field indiscretion, which may or may not tie into...
what was it? What did he do?
I believe there was some... what's the word? Popping of some description of some sort of...
oh, okay. I didn't know about that.
So he basically got done for that, and it all blew up in Canberra, and the Knights went, we would like you, so we will pay you lots of money to come up to our club, and he obviously had a huge impact there. I was devastated when he left the Raiders because I looked at him as very much the heir to Brad Clyde, and he actually probably ended up going to a really, really good things at Newcastle. He did go to great things at Newcastle and probably finished his career as a bit more of a forward leader than he was very much in those early years when he went to Manly at the mid-2000s. So I've got him in at number 4, even though he didn't play a massively high level of union before he switched to rugby league. He did play a number of years in that Sydney club comp. He was 22, I think, when he made his debut for the Raiders. I'll have to check that to me. I'm 100% sure. But he's probably the least qualified on this list, but it is a well-known fact that he was a union convert when he joined the Raiders.
What position did he play as a union player, mate?
I will check that.
Was he a breakaway, or was he more of a centre, or what?
I think he was a forward. Let me just double check. Sorry, this is the
Sorry,
one time I won't be looking at Rugby League Project. I'll be looking at Wikipedia. So this is exciting rugby league. It doesn't say what position he played.
Okay, no worries.
But he had played 3 years with Manly Marlins. Is the stat. But the story is that in 1999, he and Brandon Pearson, knee Costin, got sent home from training after being involved in a drinking session. But there were claims that they had taken hard drugs, basically.
Oh, really? Okay. They weren't on a roof at the time, were they?
But the drug tests did return negative. No, they weren't having the Bacardi breezes, a la Dukes and Fergo. But not a bad effort with the Knights and then Manly. What are your memories of Ben Kennedy?
Look, I do remember him obviously at the Raiders. I think his best days were at the Knights and Manly. I think he settled into a bit more. I do remember him turning up though, and he looked almost seasoned when he turned up. Like as far as young players come in, even 23-year-olds come in sometimes and they still look green. And he didn't. He looked like he was settled straight away, and he just really had to hone his craft a little bit to get to where he was. Great player, mate. A great stalwart for New South Wales as well. Pretty fitting that he's at in your top five, mate. Do you have a 4B?
No, 4B. 4B would be Innes.
No.
13 games for New South Wales, 16 tests for Australia. Very worthy. And interestingly enough, he actually scored 31 tries in 67 games for the Raiders between 96 and 99. He was very much an edge sort of player and a real good turn of speed. Became a bit more of a ball playing sort of middle player at the back end of his career. But he was a huge factor, and people actually argue that he should have been Clive Churchill medalist in the 2001 grand final instead of Andrew Johns. I can't agree with it, but people do often push Ben Kennedy's barrow for that. Number 3, and we get to another really established Wallaby before he turned into a St. George Dragon in 1983. Who am I talking about, Cocksmith?
You're talking about Michael O'Connor.
Michael O'Connor. He is my number 3 ranked. Union to league convert. Now, remember, this is from 82 onwards. So there's a guy called Ray Price who was a dual international, but he transferred from Union to league in the late 70s. So he actually did not qualify. Even though he played in the era that we're talking about, he didn't make the transition after 82. So Michael O'Connor had played 13 tests for Australia as Wallaby before he came to rugby league, and made an instant impact at St. George. They made the grand final in 85. And then the money started coming in from Bozo and Kenny Arthurson over there at Manly. And he went, wow, that sounds good for me. And if there's some players that you look at over the years and you go, they just belonged at this club. Michael O'Connor belonged at Manly. Now, the old Fibro versus Silvertails thing, he would never have played for Western Suburbs, Michael O'Connor. He was going to the glitz and glamour of the Seagulls. Fantastic club player, very, opportunistic kind of player. Good step, really good pace. Struggled a bit towards the end of his career with injuries in the pace department. Many people remember him as the guy who kicked that goal from the sideline in Origin in the wet. And it's funny because he also played
92,
91, I think it was 91. It was the game that Benny Geyer and Lewis get at it, I'm pretty sure. And he ended up playing 18 tests for Australia, 19 games for New South Wales. And I think he's got some record, I haven't looked it up, but for amount of points in a game until Greg Alexander broke it, I think, for Australia in one of those touring games. But an outstanding utility back, but best suited at centre. And he's my number 3.
Yeah, just out of interest, mate. Look, I do remember the footage. I wasn't at the game in 91 or 2 when he kicked that winning goal from the sideline. Were they using leather balls then, or was it a synthetic ball?
That would have been 91, I think, is leather.
Okay.
Oh, no, 91 would have been... No, 89 is the last pure leather ball.
Oh, okay. Right.
And then I think they went into the synthetic. I think 93, 94 is that white one that they could just kick an absolute mile. That was the Ricky Stewart. He loved that ball. But he also loved it a bit earlier. But the O'Connor, I think it was an older style ball though, from memory, that one. Because they also had to use the Summit balls, remember, back in Origin. You'd use the Steedens in New South Wales, and you'd use the Summits in Queensland.
Yeah. No, Michael O'Connor, good choice, mate. And he does make my top 5 as well, which I will release to the world soon.
Any memories of O'Connor at club level?
Not really, mate. Other than I just remember him being, like when he first came into to rugby league, he was a good looking bloke. He's someone that the girls would like. He was probably in the Men of League calendar, but maybe not so much at the end. He got pretty smashed up.
His nose was a la Fergo, a la Cronk.
Yeah. It was a little straighter. It was kind of like a eagle's nose. But look, he let's forget about his nose. He was a very, very good player for a number of years. I mean, most people, like you said, during our St George chats, do forget that he played for St George for a year or two, wasn't it? Or was it 3? Something like that. Anyway, he was a very good player. He also, you know, like you say, he was one of those established Wallabies, which was unheard of in the day, and no one could really work out why. The Leather Patch Brigade never liked to come over. I don't know if it was just an honour thing, you know, like they want to remain part of the amateur brigade. But yeah, Michael O'Connor, good choice.
Just got a thing I found here on Wikipedia, so it may or may not be true. We'll find out, but it looks like it is legit. In the biography of Wally Lewis, it's claimed that Australian coach Terry Fernley, who was at the time, was quoted as allegedly saying about O'Connor during the 1985 Kangaroo tour, I think of possibly New Zealand. He says, can't play, no heart. Lucky he can kick goals or he wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Wow.
definitely don't agree with that. He played at the highest level under a few judges for a fair while, and he succeeded as a footballer. And I don't know. Terry Fernley was a very good coach back in the day, but I don't know how qualified he is to say that, other than have your own opinion. You know.
Yeah, and he went on the '86 Kangaroo Tour and broke all kinds of point scoring records as well. So Michael O'Connor, number 3 on my list. We get to number 2, and he was in contention for 1, this bloke, because I think the impact he had at the club that he went to was significant. This club had real success in the 80s. They'd won a premiership towards the end of the 80s, but then they'd really dropped off in the 2 years following that. They just needed somebody to add some. It's funny. It's hard to add starch from the position that he played, but I felt like he did. And he brought in a level of quality to a art in rugby league that we hadn't seen. Well, I hadn't seen as a youngster of the era of the toe pokers and whatever. I'm talking about Matthew Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
Just an absolutely quality rugby league player who was a union player coming across. There is a great documentary on YouTube, and if you haven't seen it, it's John Kerwin talking to Matthew Ridge in the year that he comes across rugby league in 1990, I think it was. And it is fascinating to watch how the drive and the self-belief in Matthew Ridge turns himself into a rugby league player. It's not a natural thing for him, but he is so competitive and he wants to win, and he wants to prove to New Zealand Rugby that they should have given him more money. That he makes it work. And then for the next half dozen years, he is a linchpin in the development and the build-up of Manly into that, what I was talking about before, those 3 years where they were great. He left at the end of 96 because he'd signed the Super League. But Matthew Ridge, I think, is the best goal kicker I've seen play rugby league, and that includes Daryl Halligan and it includes Hazem El Masri. And it's more that I know Halligan had some moments where you just go, that's wow, but I also saw him miss some kicks that he should have got. There's a famous semi-final he plays against Penrith, I think it is, at North. But I don't remember Matthew Ridge missing kicks or important kicks. And that's why I have him at number 2.
Yep. Again, another player that's in my top 5. But look, I do agree with one thing you said there about, he brought a lot of, he was very competitive. He was tough. And if there was a brawl on the field, he was very close by usually. He wasn't a fighter as far as wanting to take guys on, but he definitely didn't ever take a backward step, Matthew Ridge. And I think any club that was competing for the premiership back in the day would have probably swapped their fullback for Matthew Ridge at one time for probably a couple of years. I think he was the best fullback in the game. And
there were some really good ones going around at the time. He just added such a level of, competitiveness. And I think that's what Manly desperately needed when they got him across. And Graham Lowe was in charge. He's the one that brought him across. And I think the likes of the Tubies and the Lions really benefited from that general at the back. And he's one of those first ones that I think of being a bit like that, in that really vocal. You could have some players who were dynamic with the ball and could run really fast, but it's an asset that Ridge brought to the game, which may have been a direct result of what he had to do at Union, which is that generaling from the back.
Yeah. No, he was a very good player. Was he a fullback in Union?
Yeah, he was.
Okay. Yep. Good choice, mate. M. Ridge.
Now just to be clear on Ridge, he didn't play a test for the All Blacks, but he did go on a tour, their British Lions tour, I think it was in 1989. Okay. So, and there's a bit of interesting stat here that he couldn't play in any of the games. Sorry, he played 6 games and he couldn't play in the test matches. All right, played 6 games on the tour, but the bloke he couldn't displace also signed for rugby league the same year. So he left because he couldn't. John Gallagher, who I don't recall. But when Ridge decided to move, Gallagher also signed with Leeds in.
Okay, yeah.
Which is interesting. So I remember everybody was talking about players who played in the Sydney or as in Australian competition. There's a bunch of players who played, obviously, over in the UK. It gets me to number 1. It should come, though, as no surprise who my number 1 is. I've even brought out the Not the Footy Show Canberra Raiders t-shirt for the episode because it is Ricky Stewart. There is no doubt in my mind that he had the most success as a Union player coming to rugby league. He turned Canberra from a very good team who had made a grand final the year before he arrived, and he displaced Ivan Henjak, who was very well thought of at the time.
Yep.
He'd come from a tour to Argentina with the Wallabies, and I think he had he was very similar. He played, let me just find it here. He played 3 tour matches, but no test matches. So he's not in the very essence a dual international, but he definitely toured on a Wallabies tour to Argentina in '87 and then joined the Raiders in '88.
That was in the era of Nick Farr-Jones, was it not?
Yeah. So, and he played fly half, scrum half as well. So he would have had some fairly handy players sitting ahead of him, but he chose to come to rugby league, and that decision suited him down on the ground. I mean, this is as much as I loved watching what Matthew Ridge brought to the game and brought to Manly. Stewart made the Raiders into the team that they were, and that I have some players at Canberra who may have been slightly higher in my list of all-time greats, maybe, but I often really find it hard to split 3 players at the Raiders, and Stewart is one of these players. His kicking game, I love Joey Johns and what he brought to the table, but Stewart had the best kicking game I've seen in rugby league. He would have been an 40-20 fiend if they'd had that rule in the times. If you want to watch an example of that, watch the 1990 grand final. He would have kicked like 6 or 7 40-20s in that match. Clutch.
Yeah, especially with those favoured balls that he could kick so long. He was the biggest kicker in the game at that time by a mile.
He was, and his playmaking, everything ran through Ricky Stewart when the ball wasn't being held around the ruck with Steve Walters. And I talk about it, and we'll surely get to more detail if we do the Canberra best team since '82. But there are a number of years there where if Ricky Stewart's healthy, Canberra probably go on either make a grand final or they win another premiership. And they still won 3 with him there. They could have won 5 or 6 if he'd been healthy for a couple of years.
He had some bad luck.
He did, but at the same time, he played on an outstanding team, and that brought the best out of him, and he brought the best out of them. The interesting thing about Stewart and how well he was regarded at the Raiders when Mal Meninga retired, who do they make captain? Do you make Laurie Daly, who's the current New South Wales captain, or do you make Ricky Stewart captain? And Tim Sheens made Ricky Stewart captain.
Sure.
It's a big tick.
I know, but I also think it was the way that Ricky played, like you just mentioned. Everything went through Ricky, and he had that. As we all know, he's got that killer competitiveness in him still, which Laurie does as well. But Ricky really wore it on his sleeve, and was the man. I think Sheens did the team a favour and gave probably the more natural leader the job, which also allowed Daly to play second fiddle. And let's be honest, he played a damn good game at second fiddle, whether it was at 6, 3, or 13, which he was known to, frequent. Ricky Stewart, mate. He's I think it's a great choice for convert. I also think, that he's definitely in the top 3 players forever for the Raiders. You know, I'm not sure if he's in the top 3 coaches for Parramatta, but
they didn't have many good ones following him, that's for sure.
For him though.
he actually had to follow the Stephen Kearney regime at the Eels, so that wasn't the easiest job. I think I said it on the podcast before, but I was actually there for a couple of months at the end of 2012, and the job ahead of him was significant. They're my top 5. So I've got Ricky Stewart number 1, Matthew Ridge at number 2, Michael O'Connor at number 3, Ben Kennedy at number 4, Craig Innes at 5A, and Scott Cooley at 5B. I have some honourable mentions, but I'm not going to mention them until you've given me your top 5, Cocksmith. So hit me.
Yep. Well, mate, we're pretty similar. 4 out of the 5 we're similar on. And the first one I'll name will give the game away as to who we're not similar on. But my number 5 is Daryl Halligan.
Yep.
Now, some people, there's a few wags around saying that, he couldn't tackle. And he probably wasn't the greatest tackler in the world. But look, he could kick a goal. And he could score a try too, by the way. If you have a look at his stats, there's quite a few tries there.
Yep.
He probably wasn't the fastest winger in the world, but he certainly wasn't the slowest either.
No.
No, I don't think he was the slowest.
He definitely wasn't quick.
No, but he could get to the line. Like close to the line, he knew how to get to the line. And I really think that he brought all of his goal kicking experience. And to this day, he's still coaching players.
Yeah, he is.
And helping players out. And I know that he's a damn fine coach as well. So given his the playing days, and I know that, there's a few others that we've left out, but he was around for a long time. And was a great player. Number 4 for me was Ridge. Of all the things we've said, fantastic player, great competitor. Number 3 was O'Connor for mine. Again, a lengthy period for the Wallabies playing for the Wallabies, and then came in and straight away, well, not straight away, but virtually straight away, with New South Wales for a long time and Australia. Second for me was BK, Ben Kennedy. Loved the way he played. Just could play beautifully on an edge or in the middle. Great hands, great defender. And number 1 was Stewart for me. So I've gone number 1 Stewart, number 2 Ben Kennedy, number 3 Mick O'Connor, 4 Matthew Ridge, and 5 Daryl Halligan.
Yeah, so, I think Halligan's a great shout. I felt bad not having him at 5, and I know I've said it earlier that Ridge is the best kicker I've seen, but Daryl Halligan was just as automatic as it got in most games. There's only a handful of matches that you can think of where, he might have missed a goal. But there's that kick against Parramatta in 98, which I love the story he tells. He goes, the reason I kicked that is because I was so dirty that I missed an easier kick about 3 minutes earlier from closer to the post. If he kicked that, they would have won the game, is how he puts it. The kick that actually I hate the most from Daryl Halligan is not a conversion. It's the field goal he kicks in the major semi-final against Canberra in 1994. And I love the bit of commentary that Sterlo sees him in hiding in there behind the ruck, and he's gone, Daryl Halligan! And he just does a little cut across the board, barely hits it properly, and it goes straight through. Terry Lamb wasn't the one taking the kick. Craig Polamalu wasn't the one taking the kick. It was Daryl Halligan coming off his wing. People forget that he played for North, and he was an instant impact at North. He's a quality addition to this list, and he'd only played, I think it's provincial rugby before he came across, but he played a lot. And he scored a lot of tries actually when I looked it up. But he obviously point scoring machine, very good servant for Canterbury. It gets to and I can't argue with much of what you've got. I think with the only swap we've got is that you've got Ridge at 4 and Kennedy at 2, or I've got Kennedy at 4.
I would have put Ngule on the bench too, I think, mate. Or Andrew Walker.
Well, Andrew Walker's in my honourables list, and I couldn't put him in my top 5 because I always felt like you didn't see enough of his best. You would see moments where you just go, I know why Phil Gould loves this bloke. And Phil Gould is his biggest fan by a mile. And Phil Gould moved Brad Fittler to lock because he wanted to get Andrew Walker into the team. Or he played at fullback sometimes. But Walker, his good games were mixed with some pretty lackluster matches, and but an outstanding talent. Could really kick a football. Instinctive, decent goal kicker on his day, but I couldn't quite put him into my top 5. And the other player that deserves recognition for what he did in a short period of time is Noah Nadruku. People think that he got discovered playing Nissan Sevens. Well, he did, but he'd already played 5 test matches for Fiji and Rugby Union, which is an interesting stat. And I wasn't really aware of that until I did a bit more research. But he led top try scorers twice in the space of 4 seasons, 93 and 96 at Canberra, like for the league. And there's some games that he played. There's a match that has been replayed on Fox a lot. It's 1993 Canberra versus Manly at Brookvale. And if you want an example of some of the defensive efforts that he could pull out, Noah Nadruku, watch that game. He does a couple of things in that game. You just go, that's a winger shouldn't be able to do that. And they're defensive players. Barnstorming runner, obviously had some issues off the field towards the end of his career. There's a really interesting interview. It's all subtitled. It's on YouTube where he speaks with a Fijian. It's in Fijian about how he came to the Raiders and the process. And there's often talk about how clubs circumvent the salary cap. Let's just say I think the story behind how Noah Nadruku got to the Raiders may include that. And let's be honest, every club was doing it, but obviously did a pretty good job because he speaks about he was in Darwin and an offer came through from the Raiders and they offered to pay his money to fly to Canberra. And he was like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Before it even signed, and all these little things that they looked after him, and he turned out into a great addition for them. Some other names you had on, did you have any other names on the list that?
Look, I had a couple before our criteria got squeezed a little bit. I did have the year thing kind of threw me a little bit. I had Ray Price. And I was under the impression that Jared Weir-Hargraves had played a fair bit of club rugby, but I tried to look for evidence to that today and couldn't find any. Yeah. All I could find was a story that he had been signed as a 19-year-old to go and play, maybe he was an 18-year-old, to go and play for Manly by Crutcher Cleal. But he was a rugby player, and he actually played for Australia in the under-19s.
So that was the discussion we had today around, well, how does this fit with players who have played, young World Cups and all that kind of thing? Just the fact that he didn't play significant union before he switched to league, even though the story is, and I remember he was a convert. People said he's a union player who's having a go at league, but it was all junior based. And the reason that I sort of said we couldn't use him is more that if you include him, then you've got to include other players you had on the list, like the Angus Crichtons and
Angus Crichton,
Murray. Callum Ponga played union, and all these. There's a lot of players that would have been eligible.
But you want them to play first class football, whether that's club rugby or whether it's with the Waratahs or whatever it might be. Weir-Hargraves, interestingly enough, was also in the Waratahs system as when he went to Manly. But look, the criteria is what it is, and I think given that, we've got our 2 best 5s. But you've also got a couple more mentions, right? You've got some.
Well, there's a player, James Grant, Jimmy Grant, the guy who scored the first try in the 1989 grand final, was a union convert. He came across in '89. He'd played 1 test for the Wallabies the year before, and he wasn't a bad footy player. He had a good turn of speed on him. In 1995, there was an influx. Gus signed Darren Juney and Peter Jorgensen. Both had played only 6 tests between them, but they both played for the Wallabies. They went on to pretty decent careers. Jorgensen lasted a bit longer than Juney in rugby league. I always remember Peter Jorgensen never lifted his knees when he ran. If you haven't seen any of the video clip, it was a running joke between me and a few of my mates that you'd be running and people would say, stop running like that, stop running like Jorgo, because you weren't trying to run fast enough. But have a look on YouTube. He just didn't lift his knees. It was hilarious. Both pretty handy players and never really rose to huge heights in league. But Gus thinking outside the box, picking up those 2 blokes from Union.
Yep. There was also 95. Was that the year Brian Smith, and not the St George coach Brian Smith?
No, Brian Smith's a little bit earlier. Brian Smith, I've done this. Arrived in 91 at Balmain. He was a protege of Alan Jones. Yes. He'd picked him across from Rugby Union, and there was great hopes that he'd be the guy. He was the reason that they got rid of Gary Freeman at Balmain. And he never went on to anything significant. 95, John Timu joins the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. And he was pretty impactful for the Dogs. They won the premiership in his first year, but he was gone very quickly after playing 26 tests for the All Blacks. Good player. I think a little bit hindsighty thought of as a great player. But he was a good player. There's a couple other names that I will throw out here. Frano Bodica now, he played a handful of games in this, for the Warriors in 95, but he was a superstar. I think it was St Helens or Wigan, one of the two. Could have been Wigan. Prolific point scorer, had played for the All Blacks. We wish we'd seen more of him here in Australia, but we didn't. And probably the other player that deserves it, there's a couple of players who deserve some honourable mentions for sticking around rugby league for a while. Andrew Leeds, who was Parramatta's big signing from rugby union in '89 at the back end of trying to
He's still around. He's still around, Andrew Leeds. Yeah, he's still doing physio. He's a physiotherapist.
Okay.
And I think he's still doing physio for somebody.
He played 14 tests for the Wallabies. And when he joined, he played a long career. He played for Penrith, Parramatta and West, I think it was, Andrew Leeds. John Schuster. Now, the reason I bring up his name is he played 3 years or so at Newcastle, but his son, Josh Schuster, is a talent in the Manly system who people have gigantic raps on. And he is one to watch out for. Kurt Sherlock. Remember Kurt Sherlock? Didn't he have a moustache?
I think he did at one stage, yeah.
Or am I thinking of Wayne Portlock?
Probably both of them.
Indeed. And then we get to the list of players who probably didn't quite work out in rugby league.
Before you go to that list, there were a couple of others in England, and I know we're very NRL centric, but there was a couple of others in England that made the switch and made it to a pretty good level. There was Tui Gamala. Remember Tui Gamala? He's like a monster.
Vaya or something, wasn't his name?
Vaya. I can't pronounce it. I could probably spell it on a good day. But Tui Gamala. Didn't Yeston Harris come from rugby union?
I think so.
The Welsh fullback?
I think so.
Too. But rugby union, obviously in England, is huge. You know, they've got the 4 nations or the 5 nations.
Harris went the other way. Harris started in league and went to union.
Did he really? Okay. I know he was Welsh, so he probably played a fair school.
Played the '95 World Cup in league, and then he played.
Yeah, he would have had a schoolboy background in rugby union, like a lot of them do, and like we've had our guys. But look, I think a lot of people get confused and think it's the same. It's virtually the same ball, same game, tackle, run. No, it's not. And there's some classics that just could not make the conversion, which you're about to tell us about.
Well,
now, I think.
You throw me some names first, and we'll rather than me just listen. Just who comes to mind?
Garrick Morgan.
Do you remember the Garrick Morgan signing and how big a deal it was?
I photographed a game, believe it or not.
Well, that's impressive because he played 2 games and you managed to photograph one of them.
I photographed a game at Lang Park. Lang Park, Garrick Morgan, useless.
And that's been
sorry,
nice,
Garrick. Very good rugby union player. Just it wasn't the right player to come and play rugby league. I'm not sure what kind of cash he was on, but whatever, probably a bit too much.
I mean, the stories are he was on hundreds and thousands of dollars.
Wow.
But he played a lot of Test rugby, and he ended up going back and playing Test rugby. So
good player.
Yeah.
Just sometimes it just doesn't translate. You know.
You would have done. Actually, it's interesting. So it wouldn't have been Lang Park. It would have been QE2 because he played against the Broncos. They lost 32-0 that day in round 4 of 1995.
QE2, sorry, mate. Mixed up.
But Garrick Morgan was lining up alongside Mark Hone, Snoopy Collins, Trevor Gilmister, Terry Cook and Brett Horsnell. The Brisbane Broncos packed that day with Glenn Lazarus, Kevin Walters, Andrew G, Brad Thorne, Alan Cann and Peter Ryan. Who
was on the bench for the Crushers that day?
Mario.
Certainly was.
Martin Locke, Travis Norton, and Craig Teven. Bobby Lidner was tasked, and that's interesting. We've talked about it, I think, very briefly before. But Lidner was also supposed to be the Crushers' big signing, and he chose not to play and coach instead. And that's an interesting one. I always wonder what the motivation behind that was. I don't think it was injury, but it may have been. clutching
maybe.
it there. But Garrick Morgan, now that I asked you this question earlier in the show, who was the other player that the Crushers signed?
Look, you mentioned a name today, earlier on today. Was it Mark Ellis? Was that the guy you're going to?
No, Mark Ellis. He signed with the Warriors for 96.
Warriors. Okay.
He was a All Black at that stage, and he was useless. Like, he had the little perm thing happening, so you'd really notice him on the field. And I'm being harsh. Useless is a really harsh word. He wasn't as good as his brother from another mother, John Ellis, who also made his debut in 1995.
Who was the one at Parramatta? And he's not an ex-rugby union player, and he's not a Kiwi, I don't believe. Who's the one we used to call Sideshow Bob? Who was that?
Matt Peterson.
Matt Peterson.
You're thinking. This is the list of the worst haircuts in rugby league history. That's what
I'm thinking of the hair. Yeah. Hey, just before we go any further, I'm going down rabbit holes all day today.
That's all right.
Who was the Welsh centre that played around about the same time as Craig Innes played for Manly? One had a Kiwi on one side. John Devereaux. That's him. Sorry.
Yeah, he's also he was a convert as well. So you've done very well there.
This is how our conversations go, folks. When Warrick and I talk, I'm always asking, who was that guy? Remember that guy?
I just fill the gaps in, don't I? It's like 100%. You press a button and I just, yep.
The
answer is there's John Devereaux, played 3 games for the Manly Sea Eagles. Yeah, something like that. The other player is Anthony Herbert. Now, you remember Daniel Herbert who played?
Yes.
This is Anthony. He actually debuted for the Wallabies before Daniel, and he'd played a bunch of tests. He played 10 test matches between 87 and 93 before he joined the Crushers. And as Matty Duncan pointed out on Twitter, when I asked the question today, he said, this is quoting Matty Duncan, he says, we're touted as a ready-made replacement for Big Mal in the Origin team, not just a club-level player.
To Origin.
Straight to Origin. Replacing Big Mal. I mean, wow. But he only played, I think, 2 games. I think the stats tell me.
Him and Garrick.
They probably would have paid $500,000 for the 2 of them across the season. And they got 4 total games out of them. They got 9 games out of St John Ellis for crying out loud. So
not great games either. They're pretty ordinary.
So yes, Anthony Herbert is the other player. A couple of the names that I will throw at you. We'll stay at the Warriors. John Kerwin came across to rugby league. Now, the reason this is interesting is that he is Sir John Kerwin now because of his exploits for the All Blacks. But that documentary I was talking about earlier with Matthew Ridge, John Kerwin's the one that conducts it. And what it is Kerwin staying with Ridge for the 2 or 3 weeks around him making his debut in the Sydney competition. And the whole time he's asking questions of what are you doing? And it's funny, like the access that he was given was sensational, but you can almost see it now knowing that he played rugby league. But you can almost see the wheels turning in Kerwin's head saying, I'd love to do this. And 3 years later or 4 years later, the money dries up and the Warriors come calling and he plays 95 and 96. He wasn't a complete flop in rugby league, John Kerwin. He just didn't quite reach the heights that he'd established for himself for the All Blacks, I think is the nicest way to say it. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a nice way to say it.
Or you could say it a different way. Which other way would you say it, mate?
I'd say he was a complete failure. To be honest. I mean, I liked him as a union player, very good player, John Kerwin. But yeah, he probably, in my mind, in my opinion, he probably wasn't there for anything other than the money.
He'd be in contention for the Battlers 13 for the Warriors, you reckon?
I think he'd be on the bench.
Bench.
Let's be honest.
So Mark Ellis was the other one. There was another player called Mark Carter, who was he played in the forwards 10 tests for New Zealand in rugby union for the All Blacks, and he played 8 games for the Warriors in 96. I'd forgotten about him. I kind of remember it now that I see his name, but they'd signed another one. And there was a player that played for Cronulla, and I couldn't think of this until I had to look it up, which annoyed me, so the mind did let me down. I mentioned his name really early on in the show, so you may not remember it. The Sharks signed him in 96 and 97. He had played Test rugby for One Nation. Then he stuck around in Australia and played for Australia in Test rugby a little bit after he played these 2 years for Cronulla. Forward, big unit, just found rugby league just to be too, I don't want to say complex, but he just never found a groove in rugby league.
You got me, mate. No.
He was South African. Tian
Strauss.
Levi's. He played a bunch of games for South Africa, and then he came to Cronulla and flamed out.
I do not remember that, and I'd lose on a trivia contest with that. What NRL Strauss play for?
Sorry?
I'm saying if that was the question, my answer would be F11K.
The other player that did make my list, Andrew Willett. Remember who Andrew Willett is?
Yes.
So he was he was a schoolboy sensation. Had played a bit of club rugby, I think, for Randwick, and then South signed him in '95. It didn't really work out.
He's a good rugby player. He's a very good rugby player.
I mentioned Matt Burke as well, who'd played for East and Manly. He was the Matt Burke before there was a Matt Burke. So Matt Burke, the one you see now and you think of as the Australian Wallaby and whatever, was actually the second Matt Burke. There was another one. Had gone around for a few years. He played from 88 to 92 in rugby league. And there's two more that I have to mention. One is an unlucky player who had a glass jaw, played for East in the early 90s.
Sonny Bill Williams?
No, late 80s, early 90s. He'd played 16 tests for the Wallabies, was a huge pickup for East and considered could be a centre, halfback, 5'8". Brett Papworth. You remember Brett Papworth?
I know the name. Yes, I know the name, but I'd actually forgotten that he played rugby union. But now I know because he's on the radio, isn't he? They just call him Pappy.
Oh, he might be, but he's
on. Yeah, one. He
had his mouth absolutely destroyed.
Did he really?
I can't remember who. It is on YouTube if you want to look it up. But he's doing an interview, I think with Channel 10 or somebody afterwards, and he's talking about how he's only played. He played 7 games across 4 seasons.
Yeah, right.
Poor fella. But they're talking to him and saying, "Oh, how do you think you can come back from this?" And he's going, "I really think that it'd be very hard for me to get up again." You can see it on YouTube, but he couldn't move his mouth. The poor fella. But Papworth was considered outstanding. But my favourite convert, I don't have many because there's players hit my top 5, but my favourite one outside that top 5A, 5B, Eion Crossan, mate. There is, when you think of quality converts who could kick goals, he's number one, surely. I mean, he's got the Halligans covered, the Ridges covered. Eion Crossan. What are your memories of Eion?
I think the audio's gone blank, mate. I'm not too sure. Mate, I don't remember. I don't want to remember Eion Crossan. Come on. Let's get serious. Let's move on. Let's get away from Eion Crossan and all those other jokers. I know what you're saying. Eion was all right, except he wasn't.
He was the very...
He was reserve grade level, maybe.
He was the essence of, we need a kicker.
Yep.
So we're going to find somehow a spot for him. And the funniest thing about Eion Crossan was he had shown nothing at South Sydney for a couple of years. And Cronulla went, we need a kicker. Yep. We'll pick him up.
No, look, best thing about Eion, I think, was the way he spelled his name. It was very interesting. Very, very interesting. Eion. Eion.
Actually, I saw it. I've downloaded. I might even put it up on the old Winfield Cup Facebook and Twitter and stuff. But he scores a try in the corner in 95 or 96, and you're just watching him run to the line, and it's just got Battler written all over it. ET sets him up, and it's the poor fella. He tried his best, and he played first grade rugby league. Congratulations to him. So there's our top 5 rugby unions, rugby league converts. We're back after the break on the Footy Show.
Not the Footy Show.
Cronulla then winning the scrum. The lock picks it up. The half goes down the blind, and this time Crossan will get the try. He gets the try, Eion Crossan, that probably he should have scored about 60 seconds ago.
Oh, it's the old chestnut down the blind side. Again, not read well by the second row, the left second row, and the lock forward for St George. Beautiful work from the halfback, getting outside his man for Cronulla. The lock forward picking up, drawing the halfback, and that always gave them the overlap. Eion Crossan, not the quickest winger in the competition, but he had enough speed to get away from Scott Goulet. For St George here, they regroup. Paul Green is outside Chapman, and that leaves Eion Crossan unmarked on the outside. Now, the fact that they screwed the scrum and put the left second row for St George and the lock forward even more out of play was instrumental in creating the overlap.
Crossan scores his 6th try of the year. From the touchline, one of the very good kickers in the game, but he's just offline.
Okay, we're back. Cocksmith, you wanted to speak.
It's very nice of you, mate. Just thrown to me like that. I was just preparing a little segment. Look, mate,
Why are you
what
preparing?
we need.
You're always preparing. Just go. Sorry, Spaceful fans.
I think what we need is anyone who's listened so far through this episode, we need a little bit of feedback, because the next team that we're going to pick, if it's not the next one, it's the one after, but the next team we're going to pick, I'm going to pick a top 5 jailbirds. All right? Top 5 jailbirds.
You'll be doing this on your own, yes.
Now listen, my parameters are this. All right? Must have played games between 82 and today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say jailbirds, I use the term rather loosely. I don't mean they had to go to jail. I just mean they had to have been arrested or spent a night in a watch house. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know anything you're saying because I'm not playing this game, but yes.
So they can, to qualify, they must have been arrested or spent time in a watch house. And yeah, you don't necessarily need to be charged with anything in my book here. You just need to have had history that I can look up on the internet. And trust me, there's plenty, but I'm going to whittle it down to top 5.
Okay.
Now, the parameters for getting into my top 5 isn't necessarily the kind of crime you did, allegedly. It could be a combination of how profile you were, how high profile you are, and the crime you did. It could even be a stupid crime. It could even be, swearing in public. But it's got to be something that I can look up, and so I don't have to keep saying allegedly.
You'll be saying that. Even if you don't say it more than 5 times in the next show, I'm going to record you saying it once. And then every time you say something, allegedly.
So yeah, top 5 jailbirds, and I will have a reserves bench as well. And we will get
do a top. You could do a full team.
I probably could. I'm struggling with a fullback. Have you got one for me?
Yeah, you just moved someone who had halfback into the number 1 job. You played there the whole year.
Craig Field is playing halfback, mate. All right.
5'8".
I've got another one for that.
No, you moved him from 5'8" to fullback because he played fullback there.
I know. So guys, please get on Twitter, and Woz is on Twitter at, I don't know, what's your Twitter handle, mate?
I like how you listen to this every time. At NRL Tweet, and he's at Robb Cox. So you can
at NRL Tweet. Is there any underlines or anything between
it? I secured NRL Tweet back in 2009, mate. I was on Twitter before NRL was.
Or mine. Jump on Instagram and send me a direct message. Slide into my DMs and send me some names and alleged offences, if you can remember them.
People are going to be cheering about allegedly saying that so-and-so did this, and have it there for you to screenshot and then send to their parole officer afterwards and say, yes, I have this information. That's sorry, I just uncovered what you
was that? But so that'll be a bit of fun anyway. Yep. Maybe not fun if you're mentioned as a jailbird, not the Footy Show jailbird, top 5 contender. But it's just a bit of fun, because we're getting a bit bored. We've been locked up for so long. I mean, sooner or later, we're going to get to another team, and then we might name, an ugly team of the century or something like that.
I love that. Coxman's happy to do you dead set so ugly the mirrors break. He's happy to do that team, but he won't mention that a player was no good at rugby league. That's the bit that I just love.
Well, I will mention that. I'll mention that if I don't think they're any good. You know that.
You wouldn't do a Battlers 13 for me. I asked for a Battlers 13.
Of what team?
Every team I've done so far.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll start naming a Battlers 13. I'll name a Battlers Jailbirds team as well.
That'll be the same side, won't it?
Did you know, I looked up today, just briefly, I looked up today just about a Jailbirds team. Do you know that there's been some NRL players that have played NRL back in the real early 80s, but more likely the 70s, that were charged with pretty big things like import cocaine, all sorts, mate, big things. I mean, we've had murder too. Let's not forget that.
Murder 1 as well, or
Murder 1 as well. Yeah. Hey, boom, boom.
That's me, folks. I'll see you later.
Yeah. So anyway, mate, that's coming up in the next week or two. The Jailbirds. We can think of something better. We'll have to think of a more catchy thing than Jailbirds. I don't know. Convicts. I don't know. We'll come up with something. So that's my big news for the week. Have you got anything, Woz?
No, nothing to tell you. Apart from the fact that we've gone I can't. How did we do an hour again? How does it?
No,
how does it happen?
I don't know. We tried to push through. I don't know, mate. We're just entertaining to each other. That's all.
Problem is, no one else seems to care. Anyway, we've been doing our best, which is all we do here on Not the Footy Show. 209 episodes in the can. There was our best Union to League converts. If you've got a list of your own, please feel free to reach out. Facebook.com/NRL podcast. Facebook.com/NRL podcast or @NRL tweet is the best place to tell us about your lists. I'm doing more videos on the Winfield Cup Twitter handle and on Facebook as well. I've just been actually this afternoon editing down Andrew Johns' run-on debut in '94 from the old NBN coverage. They used to do a Monday night league. They'd replay it at like 10 o'clock at night, I think it was, on the Monday night of every Newcastle game that was played. Pretty fascinating performance from Joey Johns. You've seen really short highlights of that performance, but a lot of the traits that he had throughout his career in this game. Being willing to run the ball off as a forward, getting in the way of legs and knees of bigger forwards from the get-go. Matty Johns actually gets absolutely KO'd by Tyron Smith in this match, and he is not a well puppy. It's quite an interesting thing. I've cut down to about 40 minutes. I'll try and reduce it to about 20 to 30 because I think that's about right on YouTube. So look out for that as well. And Rob, we'll reconvene maybe at the end of the week and we'll see how we go. But mate, I hope isolation is treating you okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I can't wait to get out of the house, man. I'm telling you, I'm getting a little stir crazy. I can come up with all sorts of things to pass my time, you know, but it's just the same thing every day. I wake up, it's dead set Groundhog Day.
I had two coffees by 11 o'clock today. That's not a good sign.
Yeah, I just had my third before in the first 15 of this show. But anyway, I've got a fair bit of stuff to do to my son's go-kart this afternoon.
Oh, nice.
He is going to go for a go-kart drive in the next couple of days. There is a track open in Sydney.
Oh, lovely.
And we're going to go. And they're limiting it to 15 people at a time. But in the next few days, we'll get there so we can have a blast.
Awesome. Well, enjoy that, mate. We'll speak to everybody next time. It'll be 210 episodes next time we catch up. And I've been Warrick Nicolson. That's been Rob Cox. And we'll speak to you next time on Not the Footy Show.
Catch you later, mate. And might have a little Pepsi.
Not the Footy Show.
Is the fact that they'll be disappointed with their defence, the fact that it has been broken so often as Matthew Ridge goes for the short kick-off. Great play, brilliant play. Yet Manly have only scored one try and that was through a kick, and he's called Ridge to play on.
That's a very strange ruling by David Manson, and Manly have got an opportunity now in front of the half-time siren. Tierney is with it, formerly from St George, got his pass for Crossan. Crossan gets it away from Menzies, and Manly are over. Manly are over on half-time. I think it's Menzies underneath there.
It's Menzies.
Steve Menzies has scored his 20th try of 1996.
Actually, it was after Matthew Ridge had made that run and he wasn't held and he got up and ran again, and there was people thought he was held, but I thought it was play on.
Not the Footy Show.
Pepsi.